Hey guys, tonight we're heading far, far back, to the dusty brick lanes of Uruk, one of the first true cities on Earth. It's hot, it's bustling, and the air smells faintly of goat, river mud, and freshly baked barley. You walk past ziggurats, dodge a donkey cart or two, and finally duck into a shadowy, sun-baked chamber that claims to be a library. But not just any library. There are no books here. No shelves either, actually. You're surrounded instead by racks of dense, clay tablets, dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, some cracked, some still damp from the kiln. The floor is gritty, the ceiling low, and somewhere in the back, a scribe sneezes into his elbow and sends a puff of dust up into the hot air. Welcome to the archives of ancient Sumer. You probably won't survive this job. The hours are long, the tablets are heavy, and if you drop one, it's not a quick fix, it's a clay-based catastrophe. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is. Drop it in the comments, let's make this our global bedtime club. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge farther into the room, eyes adjusting to the gloom. Your first task. Identify which of these brick-like documents is the list of grain rations, and which is a poem about the goddess Inanna's latest romantic exploits. They're the same color, the same size, and both have wedge-shaped scribbles in dizzying rows. That's right, this library doesn't organize its collection with titles or author names. You've got clay tablets arranged more or less by vibe. Some lean together in bins made of sun-baked reeds. Others rest in carved cubbies that might have once been wine racks. And the floor? It's the resting place for overflow. Always the floor. You pick up a tablet. It's heavier than you expected, probably 5 pounds, maybe more. And it's warm. Not just from the air, but from the sun that's crept in through the cracks in the walls. The Sumerians, masters of mud and fire, baked these tablets in kilns or just left them out in the sun for days. These aren't fragile scrolls, they're almost geological. A scribal assistant scurries past, muttering under his breath about the Gilgamesh mix-up. Apparently, someone shelved the prologue next to a shipment record for sheep intestines. Again. You crouch to examine a series of low shelves, noticing that some tablets are grouped with twine loops threaded through a hole in the corner. Ah, early cataloging. You trace your fingers along the twine, half expecting it to snap like a dry noodle. Somehow, it holds. Each bundle has a little clay token attached, maybe a symbol, maybe a number. Or maybe it's a joke only the original scribe would get. Scholars today still argue whether some of these marks were classification codes or just doodles. Near the back wall, the senior scribe gestures you over. He's older than the oldest tablet and somehow more brittle. He taps the top of a pile and explains that these are temple donation records. Very important. Do not misfile. One day, the gods themselves might want to audit. So you start sorting. Carefully. Each time you pick up a tablet, you tilt it to catch the light, letting the indentations cast tiny shadows. It's like reading a desert, one wedge at a time. Some tablets hum with bureaucracy, 16 bundles of flax given to the temple by Uarnamu's third cousin. Others, strangely, feel poetic, when the moon wails, the barley will rise. And in the mix, the occasional surprise, a recipe for lentil stew, complete with serving suggestions and a warning not to oversalt if your guests are noble. You wonder how many people have touched this tablet before you. 3? 30? And whether the original author ever imagined that, millennia later, a sleepy time traveler like you would be squinting at their wedge marks, trying to decide if this was a tax record or a love letter. You're still kneeling on the stone floor of the library, ankles stiff, squinting at a tablet that might be a hymn or might be the world's first calendar reminder. A scribe chuckles behind you and mutters something about beginners. It's fine. You'll learn. Eventually. Now, you may think a library is for everyone. But in ancient Sumer, that's just not the case. Reading and writing are elite skills, guarded like a family recipe. Only a tiny fraction of the population knows cuneiform, and they tend to be priest scribes, temple administrators, or the guy who translates your dreams into metaphor-laced omens. Learning to read takes years. First, the syllabary, hundreds of symbols. Then, grammar, which changes depending on the tablet's intended audience, god, king, or goat herder. You train your hands to make tiny, perfect wedges using a stylus carved from reed. And there's no paper to mess up on. Every mistake is immortalized in clay. You glance around. Everyone else here is either old enough to have learned cuneiform before it was cool, or young enough to still be afraid of the senior scribe. You're somewhere in between, hoping not to be noticed. In one corner, a teenage apprentice is reciting line after line of Sumerian word pairs: sun and day, grain and wealth, cow and patience. His mentor corrects him, swats him with a rolled-up document, then makes him start over. It's gentle, in a traumatizing kind of way. Women? Rarely seen in this scriptorium. A few priestesses were trained as scribes, especially if their temple was wealthy or their father had pull. But mostly, the world of clay knowledge is a male preserve. The head scribe suddenly bellows your name. He wants you to retrieve the collection of proverbs about donkeys. You find it after some searching, 6 tablets stacked in a shallow wooden tray, all slightly curved from improper firing. One proverb reads, "A donkey that hears no whip becomes a philosopher." You blink. That's surprisingly deep. Historians still debate the tone of these proverbs. Were they jokes? Teaching tools? Passive-aggressive notes left in communal spaces? No one really knows. But they're scattered throughout these archives like breadcrumbs of personality in a very dusty loaf of history. You haul the tablet bundle back to the scribe. He nods, then waves you off to your next task, cleaning the work table. You sigh, stand, and try not to drop anything. As you wipe down the surface with a damp reed cloth, you notice carved graffiti on the underside: "URKAL the younger eats figs like a goat." You smile. Some things never change, your arms are already tired, and you've only been sorting clay for an hour. Welcome to the glamorous world of early librarianship. This particular morning, you're assigned to the tablet pit. It's not an official term, but it's the only phrase that fits. Piled waist-high with unfiled documents, the pit is where clay goes to be forgotten, or found again, if someone's patient enough. That someone is you. You lower yourself into the heap and begin. Each tablet must be examined, identified, and sorted. But there's no indexing system, no neat Dewey Decimal tags. You're guided by shape, thickness, and guesswork. You pick up a wide, flat piece that appears to be a legal record, witness statements about a stolen goat and the subsequent headbutting incident. Next, a long, narrow tablet etched with numbers and circles. A mathematician's notes? Or a very intense shopping list? Sorting these isn't just physical, it's psychological. Some scribes preferred elaborate formatting, stacking their lines like poetry. Others just crammed as much as they could into every inch. The result? Tablets that look similar can be wildly different in content. To help, you start your own makeshift system: lines drawn in the dust, little piles arranged by content: religious, administrative, educational, and miscellaneous. Which grows rapidly. Eventually, you uncover a tablet that isn't clay at all, it's stone, smoothed and etched so finely it gleams. A dedication, maybe? You read it aloud: "To Nana, moon god, keeper of scribes." It's dated, though the numerals are fuzzy. The signature, however, is clear, in Lil Z, librarian. You grin. A kindred spirit. Nearby, a novice drops a tablet. It shatters. Everyone freezes. Then, laughter. It's been copied already, someone says. Still, the novice looks ready to cry. You offer your pile to the senior scribe. He surveys it. Grunts. Nods. High praise, by his standards. You return to the pit, tablet dust in your nose, sand in your sandals, and a curious sense of pride in your heart. The senior scribe hands you your next challenge: categorize a crate of untagged tablets. No string, no symbols, no context, just raw clay and mystery. You sigh. Another perfect day in Sumer. You bring the crate to a quiet corner of the library and begin the slow, meditative work of deciphering. It's oddly calming. The soft, rhythmic swish of your reed cloth. The faint scratch of stylus on practice clay from a student nearby. The distant bleat of a goat who has no business being this close to ancient literature. Tablet 1 is easy, a hymn to Enki, god of water and mischief. You spot the telltale opening lines, O Enki, who stirs the abyss. Tablet 2 is tougher, it opens mid-sentence and seems to be a ledger of incense shipments. Tablet 3 might be someone's lunch order. There's debate about that. To keep track, you carve miniature labels in scrap clay and lay them beside each tablet. You invent categories on the fly: religious, trade, law, weird, and unclear but aggressively written. Historians today still debate how the Sumerians classified documents. Some argue they used numerical tags tied to administrative systems. Others believe visual markers or color-coded slips existed, but few have survived. A few optimists claim librarians simply remembered everything. You're not optimistic. After 3 hours, your eyes are gritty and your back aches. But your little system is working. Slowly, the crate empties, and the tablets fan out into neat rows of Sumerian bureaucracy. You place a final piece into the unclear but aggressively written pile. It starts, "He who fails to measure barley properly shall know regret." You chuckle. Someone was having a day. You step back and admire your work. Not bad. The head scribe passes, glances at your labels, and mutters, "Cute." It's unclear if that's praise. You'll take it. Today's task sounds simple: figure out the genres of Sumerian texts. In practice, it's more like deciphering a mixtape made by a civilization with no vowels and a passion for both taxes and poetry. You begin by pulling tablets from each major category. First, hymns, plenty of those. Invocations to gods, goddesses, and celestial bodies you didn't know existed. One reads, "O radiant Ninhursag, whose milk nourishes the mountains," poetic, sure, but hard to file under, practical. Next up, administrative logs. Endless, endless logs. You lose track of how many oxen are mentioned, how much barley was measured in gur, and how many goats were traded for reeds. Some are painfully dry. Others, strangely snarky. One tablet ends with a footnote: Lugaland claimed 12 jars, but we only found 8. Typical. Then, there's the wild card pile. Erotic poems? Check. Fables about talking trees? Definitely. Medical texts that recommend crushed copper and frog fat for headaches? You bet. The Sumerian imagination was vast, and they didn't mind mixing genres on a single tablet. You find one text that starts as a trade contract, then detours into a weather omen, and finishes with a warning about demons who live in baskets. How do you file that? Some tablets are clearly instructional, used in schools for young scribes. These feature repeated lines like, "The man dug a canal," over and over. You read them aloud, and it's oddly hypnotic. And of course, Gilgamesh makes an appearance. Everywhere. Fragments of the story pop up in religious sections, in philosophy, even hidden among tax ledgers. You suspect scribes just liked quoting him whenever possible. Who wouldn't? Historians still debate whether the Sumerians recognized literature as a separate concept. To them, the divine and the bureaucratic blended fluidly. One tablet might praise a god, the next will tally barley with equal reverence. You pause, sigh, and carefully carve a new tag, unclassifiably Sumerian. You're back in the shade of the archive's inner chamber, this time assigned to dust off the sacred collections, a grand term for a few clay boxes filled with what look like beat-up relics from a clearance sale at the Temple of Nana. Some are chipped, others look like they've been nibbled by mice. One smells faintly of bitumen and regret. The boxes contain religious texts meant for special rituals, lunar ceremonies, funerals, healing rites. You handle them with extra care, not just because they're sacred, but because the senior scribe is watching from the shadows like a hawk with a reed stylus. You lift a thick, warped tablet and begin to read aloud softly, when the stars align in the east, burn juniper, then chant the name of the goddess thrice. You squint. Did that just say, thrice? Fancy. The Sumerians loved their rituals. Even their cleaning routines could involve a chant. You find one that describes how to clean a temple floor while reciting praise for Enlil, god of wind and bureaucracy. You can't tell whether it's devotion or just multitasking. Next to it, a smaller tablet, lightweight and round. A personal prayer? No, it's a spell. Specifically, a spell to prevent diarrhea caused by angry spirits. It calls for garlic, oil, and a chant that makes your tongue ache to pronounce. Historians still debate whether these were sincere or satirical, maybe both. Either way, you file it under medical rituals. You work your way through the stack. One text describes how to build a miniature ziggurat out of bread dough for an offering. Another is just a list of god names in descending order of importance, someone's divine cheat sheet, perhaps? As you brush the clay dust from your fingertips, you notice something curious. Certain tablets have impressions of seals, cylinder seals, rolled across the surface like ancient signatures. Some show scenes of worship, others of gods with wings, lions, or multiple heads. The seals act like signatures and stamps of legitimacy. You imagine a priest finishing his work, then rolling his seal like an artist signing a canvas, probably muttering, "That'll impress the moon god." You take a break and sip from your little clay flask, lukewarm water and barley mash. Not exactly iced coffee, but enough to keep your eyelids open. You glance back at the sacred collection, marveling at the range of content. These weren't just divine decrees, they were daily spiritual maintenance logs. One tablet catches your eye. It's inscribed in a slightly different dialect, more ornate, poetic. A rare example from the city of Eridu, perhaps? It reads like a lullaby, "Let the night be soft. Let the stars cradle your sleep." For a moment, the tablet in your hand feels more like a whispered blessing than a clay record. You make a note on your tag, Eridu dialect? Check with linguist. Then you pause. There is no linguist. It's just you, the tablets, and a mountain of clay waiting to be remembered. You're assigned to the lone wall, next, a series of low shelves beside the archive's exit door where scribes and priests could temporarily borrow texts. It's essentially a circulation desk without the stamp pads or whispering librarians. A slab of mud brick with faint grooves marks the outbound slot, texts going out. Another slab, deeply scratched and chipped, marks returns. You wonder how many of those returns were overdue by, say, a few centuries. This system was surprisingly sophisticated. You find tablets with names, titles, and borrowing conditions. Tablet of astronomical omens, loaned to High Priest Dumuzi of Ur, returned by 7th moon, 3rd day. Scribes likely enforce the deadlines with all the warmth of a tax auditor. There's a tiny notation, returned late, goat offered in recompense. That's one way to pay a fine. You handle a text with a broken corner and try to piece together its record. It's a tale of Inanna's descent into the underworld, borrowed and returned 5 times over a decade. Was it just that popular? Or did it take that long to read? You suspect some borrowers were chronic rereaders, whispering dramatic lines under oil lamps late into the night. Next, you come across the equivalent of a library complaint, a short but passive-aggressive inscription reading, "This tablet was borrowed and returned damaged. Next time, care for the word as you would your kin." It's the ancient Sumerian version of a sticky note on the fridge saying, "Who left this mess?" Historians still debate how centralized these loan systems were. Some say only temple scribes could borrow, while others argue that certain merchants or nobles had reading privileges too. One especially well-worn tablet has a smudge of lapis lazuli embedded in its edge. Perhaps it belonged to a jeweler seeking good omens before a sale? You find yourself tracing the grooves left by countless thumbs and styluses, and realize, this wall is alive with the habits of hundreds of users. The borrowed tablet wasn't just a text, it was a moment of hope, ritual, or curiosity. A farmer asking the gods about flood omens. A midwife looking up protective chants. A teenager sneaking a love poem past the priest. As you step back from the shelf, a breeze sneaks in through the open corridor. You smell barley bread and temple incense, and for a moment, you're no longer a record keeper, you're just another visitor, checking out a little guidance for your day. You find yourself reassigned to a quieter task today, scraping melted wax off older catalog tablets. These wax coatings were used to overwrite temporary notations, a clever way for ancient minds to make corrections without wasting fresh clay. You kneel by the low shelf marked administrative rotations, where tablets that tracked circulation, borrowing, repairs, and visitor logs were kept. It's dry, dusty work, but oddly soothing. As you scrape the residue with a smooth shard of obsidian, you come across an old list of regular visitors. Kygel the merchant, Mondays. Ishmi Dagon, priest of the third gate, Fridays only. Inatum, who always asks about celestial flood myths. A library card system without cards. The Sumerians were master list makers. If it could be organized, they organized it. Texts were sometimes grouped by subject, divination, law, healing, poetry, and by intended user. You spot notations like, "For novices only," or "Senior scribes use recommended." One clay docket features the scratched complaint of a junior priest, "Too many tablets labeled advanced. I simply asked where the sun sleeps." Not far from the shelf, you notice a table dedicated to corrections. Broken tablets often had their content recopied onto fresh clay. You find a two-piece set, a shattered original and its neater, younger sibling. The scribe has even left a small note, corrected misspelling of "Ningursu," "Do not blame me, blame my rush." A classic case of clerical snark that transcends millennia. You hear murmurs from across the hall. Two archivists are arguing about a poem's correct translation. Is the Great Flood literal or metaphorical? Historians today still argue whether Sumerian literature referenced actual climate events or simply used them as narrative drama. Either way, the line, "And the earth wept, and the rivers forgot their names," is enough to stop you in your tracks. Back at your post, you discover something unexpected, a scroll-shaped tablet, rounded into a long, cylindrical form. It's been pressed, not inscribed, designed for rapid duplication. The message is a standard temple loan agreement, but the twist lies in its final line, "Reader shall whisper this text at night, alone, before copying." A library with its own bedtime rituals. You mark it for preservation and move on. You're halfway through a particularly sooty tray of returns when a faded inscription stops you cold. If found, return to the house of knowledge, where the gods walk in silence. You blink. Poetic, or a little eerie. Either way, you can't help smiling. Even their filing instructions sounded like lullabies. The next morning, you're ushered toward a special chamber tucked behind a linen-curtained doorway. It's called the Whisper Room, though you suspect that's more poetic than literal. Here, the archive keeps its oldest, most fragile clay texts, the ones that crumble if you sneeze too hard in their direction. You're handed a reed stylus, not to write, but to gently lift fragments. Your first assignment? Reconstructing a tablet of proverbs. Yes, Sumerians had their own version of Pinterest quotes. You squint and whisper as you piece it together. A loud mouth is like an open jar, it spills quickly and holds little. Ouch! The tablet continues, he who insults the potter may dine without a bowl. Practical and petty. Some of these sayings survive almost verbatim in later Babylonian copies. Historians still debate whether they originated as folk wisdom, religious doctrine, or comedy routines passed around temple schools. You pick up another tablet, less elegant, more erratic. It's a child's writing exercise. Sloppy lines, repeated phrases. My name is Lugal-Namtar. I know my signs. I am not lazy. Over and over. A desperate plea? Or just homework? As you shift your weight, your elbow nearly nudges a precarious stack. You catch it in time, heart pounding. These texts are brittle, but powerful. You pick up a piece etched with a poem to Inanna, goddess of love and war. Your lips are honeycomb, your fury is the sandstorm. You note the double-edged nature of that praise. In a far corner sits a curious object, an odd trapezoid of clay, hollow inside. You peer in and see holes carved neatly through. It's a tablet case, meant to store fragile texts and protect them during floods or fires. Like a little safety deposit box for words. You realize that this chamber isn't just storage, it's memory preservation. A clay brain of a civilization long vanished. The temperature is cooler here, and the air smells faintly of baked earth and sandalwood. You sit cross-legged on a reed mat, working carefully, humming softly. A fellow scribe enters with a wrapped parcel, a fresh find from a ruined temple outside Lagash. The excavation team believes it might be the lost ledger of temple musicians. You're allowed a peek. Inside, a list of instruments, players, and performance notes. Nana's hymn, drums too loud, reed flute off-key. Even gods had sound complaints. You close your eyes for a moment, surrounded by faded ink and cracked tablets, and think, what a strange, meticulous, beautiful thing it was, to trust in baked mud for immortality. Word count, 1067, the sun filters in as you enter the scriptorium, a space less dusty than the archive, but 10 times more tense. Here, new tablets are made and old ones copied. You're greeted by the scrape of styluses and the occasional frustrated sigh. A fresh apprentice is muttering, why do the gods need all these footnotes? Today, you're tasked with copying a long legal code, one that predates Hammurabi by centuries. It's written in Sumerian formal script, stiff, angular, unforgiving. Your wrist aches just looking at it. The code outlines property rights, grain disputes, and marriage rules. You read aloud, if a donkey eats another's barley, the owner must compensate in equal measure. Justice, ancient style. There's also a rule about noisy neighbors. If one singing disturbs the ziggurat's sleep, a complaint may be lodged. A polite way to say, keep it down, Lugal. As you etch the law line by line, you glance at the walls. Carved into the plaster are stylized depictions of scribes, styluses poised like spears, robes fluttering in imagined winds. You wonder how accurate they are. No one here looks that heroic. Next to you, an older scribe is composing a hymn. He mumbles as he writes, let the waters rise in praise. Let the fish dance in the canals. You glance over. His stylus is tipped in black-dyed resin, a status symbol among the elite scribes. Probably gets first pick of lunch too. Historians still debate how much creative freedom these scribes had. Were they merely copiers, or something closer to editors? Some tablets have subtle tweaks, word order changed, metaphors added. One clay poem you saw yesterday swapped moon for mirror of the sky, and no one knows why. You suspect boredom. By midday, the room gets hot. The clay dries faster than you can inscribe. You pause to sip barley water and stretch your back. Around you, murmurs continue. Someone is composing a letter to a friend in distant Elam. Another is scribbling notes about cloud shapes. Do clouds tell omens? The note asks. You smile. As your stylus carves the final lines of the law tablet, you realize something oddly satisfying: these weren't just laws. They were beliefs, guesses, arguments turned permanent. Every rule was a story in disguise. And here you are, just one more hand in a long line of hands, keeping the clay breathing. You're outside the main library compound now, watching scribes gather under a reed pavilion for midday recitations. This is how texts were taught, by repetition, chant, and call and response. Today's lesson: agricultural omens. You catch phrases like, "If the locusts fly east in winter, the flax shall fail," and, "When the goat refuses grain, sell your barley." Some scribes are whispering the words with closed eyes, like a lullaby or prayer. Others struggle, mispronouncing divine names or reversing the cuneiform signs. The instructor, a wiry woman with a voice like gravel, corrects them with no hesitation. It's not Gishkamil, it's Gishkimel. Do you want the flood to come early? This oral reinforcement keeps the entire system running. Even in a land of writing, memory matters. You kneel on the back and hum the rhythm softly, tasting the cadence like it's old honey on your tongue. Behind the pavilion, a junior librarian wheels a cart of wet clay slates toward the drying room. These new texts have to be exposed to the sun for a precise amount of time. Too short, they'll smudge; too long, and they'll crack like burnt bread. You offer to help. She smiles and hands you one. It's an epic about the white fox of Uruk. You resist the urge to read ahead. Historians still argue whether these library schools were formal state institutions or attached to temple bureaucracies. Some evidence points to strong temple ties, especially since the syllabary includes long prayers to gods like Nabu and Enlil. But other scholars believe merchant guilds sponsored them as practical training grounds for record-keeping and contracts. Your arms ache from balancing the heavy trays, but you pause to notice something charming. One wet tablet has a paw print stamped right into its surface. A temple cat, no doubt. Another has a tiny human fingerprint, likely a child's, along the edge. You imagine some young apprentice dropping his lesson, blushing as the clay caught more than just cuneiform. The sun leans lower in the sky. Shadows stretch across the compound, and the chant of omens continues behind you, like waves folding over sand. A quiet, steady music of memory. The head librarian is a man named Uarkadanu. He's tall, silver-haired, and walks with a staff shaped like a question mark. Today, he beckons you to join him inside the restricted wing, the vault of singular tablets. This is where they store the texts that don't fit neatly into categories. Odd ones. Lonely ones. He pulls aside a curtain woven with tiny shell beads, and you follow him into the cooler chamber. He hands you a small clay disc, no bigger than your palm. A prayer for a missing goat, he mutters, dated 300 years before Hammurabi. You try not to laugh. The inscription reads, "Let the beast be found. Let it stop eating reeds. Let it return in shame." Next, you're shown a half-melted tablet, rescued from a fire in Umma. The top is scorched into glass, the bottom intact. You can just make out a poem praising a speaking tree that tells fortunes in riddles. Whether that's metaphor or real hallucination, nobody knows. Historians still debate whether such texts are mythic invention or ritual satire. A third item, a ledger marked reparations for broken vessels. It details who dropped what, how badly, and what compensation was paid. You smile as you read, "Jar shattered by apprentice. Replaced with dried fish and apology." Sounds fair. The vault has rules. Only 2 people at a time. No food or water near the texts. And absolutely no loud laughter. Apparently, someone once snorted at a love poem and cracked a wall shelf. Uarkadanu leads you to a final object, a jar-shaped tablet meant to be buried upright in the earth. It's filled with blessings for future readers, whoever they might be. One line reads, "May you not be bored by our dust." A kind of time capsule in clay. You run your fingers along the rim, feeling the indentations like braille from the past. As you leave the chamber, he claps you on the shoulder and says, "You've got the clay touch." Not everyone does, you know. Some crack under pressure. It's your turn to supervise the midday returns. A group of students from a nearby scribal academy arrives, each carrying a satchel of clay fragments. These aren't just tablets, they're test samples, lesson scraps, and copied excerpts meant for practice. It's like a clay recycling center. You greet the group, led by a small girl with ink-stained fingers. She presents a miniature tablet titled, "Three Worms in a Jar." It's a moral fable, apparently. You skim it. One worm ate too fast, one not at all, the last shared her leaves and was praised by the rain god. Not bad. A young boy hands you a song, "The River Sings at Night." His handwriting is jittery but earnest. The melody's not included, but the rhythms and the phrasing suggest something lullaby-like. You almost hum it. While checking the return stamps, you find a curious anomaly, a tablet with no author, no catalog number, no subject label. Just a single phrase, repeated over and over, "I am here. I am still here." You show it to another librarian, who shrugs. Probably a poetic tantrum. Or someone who got bored during inventory. Historians still argue whether anonymous tablets were meant to be private works or accidental additions. Some believe they were emotional exercises, clay journaling. Others think they were offerings to gods, with no audience in mind but the divine. You begin the tedious process of sorting by tablet shape, square for contracts, rectangular for hymns, oval for lists. A cracked triangular fragment catches your eye. The word "moonlight" is inscribed in large, deliberate strokes. No context. Just moonlight. You place it in the mystery bin. Outside, thunder grumbles on the horizon. A summer storm approaches. You hasten the return process, moving trays to the covered shelf. The students thank you, filing out 2 by 2, still chattering about which god has the best beard. You pretend not to listen, but it's definitely Nana, right? The wind picks up, and you feel a sprinkle on your arms. Time to secure the archive shutters before the real rain hits. The rain has passed, leaving the air rich with petrichor and the scent of damp reeds. Tonight, you're on evening shift, tasked with closing rituals and locking down the clay chambers. You carry an oil lamp through the hallway, its flicker casting long shadows across the walls. Your first duty, sprinkle fine sand along the thresholds. It keeps insects from crawling in overnight. It also crunches satisfyingly underfoot, a small sensory reward for the end of a long day. As you check the security cords tied to each tablet shelf, you notice something tucked in the corner, a private journal, mostly intact. These personal tablets weren't meant for circulation, but sometimes they slipped through. You sit cross-legged and begin to read. "Today I broke a stylus. It snapped like my patience. Your Nana laughed at me. I pretended to smile. Later, I copied a poem about the stars. I think it helped. Simple, honest, timeless." You close it gently and mark it for restricted holding. There's something too real about it. Too now. The lamp crackles softly as you reach the library's rear gate, a ceremonial arch lined with inscriptions of protective curses. "Let no thief pass. Let no fire breathe. Let no forgetfulness grow." You recite them softly as you draw the inner bolt. Historians still debate the practical power of these written curses. Were they meant literally, magically, or simply to deter clumsy apprentices? You make a final pass through the entry atrium, where a giant clay map of the heavens hangs suspended on the wall. You press your palm to it, as tradition demands, and whisper, "Guide the words through night." The stars etched in it are aligned with the same constellations you saw outside before sunset. Real and mythical, all at once. And with that, the last door closes. The words rest, for now, you wake before sunrise, summoned by an urgent knock. A traveling merchant has arrived bearing news, and, more excitingly, foreign tablets. These are rare and costly, traded like precious stones. You throw on your linen wrap, splash water on your face, and meet him by the gate. His donkey is laden with scroll-shaped clay tubes from Elam, round token tablets from Ebla, and even one palm-sized relic inscribed with Harappan script, still undeciphered. You handle it like glass. The merchant grins. "You have ink on your nose," he says. "You do. It's permanent." You lead him inside, and the head archivist joins you in the appraisal room. Together, you unpack each artifact and read their titles aloud. On the migration of herons. A list of 93 boat types. The dream visions of Fishmouth, son of dust. You document each item and sort them into holding trays. One in particular catches your eye, a dual-language contract written in Sumerian and a Proto-Hurrian dialect. It details the trade of 6 jars of rose paste for 1 tortoise drum. Historians still argue whether the tortoise was literal or a metaphor. Either way, someone got a sweet-smelling deal. Once the merchant departs, you're assigned the task of integrating these new texts into the catalog. This requires cross-referencing by subject, dialect, date, and reader type. The last category is tricky. Who's most likely to request a treatise on migratory herons? Probably not the priest of irrigation rites. As the sun rises fully, casting a warm gold across the corridor, you realize you've spent nearly an hour just admiring the foreign scripts. Some characters curl like vines. Others stab like thorns. Your own script suddenly feels minimal. And yet, here you are, the silent bridge between languages, between cities, between people separated by time and terrain. All through clay, and so, with the morning light gilding the library walls, you begin your day once more in quiet partnership with the past. The scent of damp earth lingers. Clay tablets whisper under your hands. You move gently, steadily, as the dust settles and the hours stretch forward. The air is soft, the sky pale and wide. Your breathing slows. The work is steady, and so are you. The ancient words, some half forgotten, some vivid as yesterday, curl softly in your thoughts like a lullaby. Here, among record keepers and red-inked proverbs, you're not alone. You're simply part of the long, long story. Sleep now, traveler of time and text. Let the library guard your dreams. You push the heavy curtain of reeds aside, stepping into the quiet hush of the chief scribe's quarters. It's a low-roofed chamber, lined with bundles of unbaked clay tablets in varying stages of readiness, some freshly molded and soft, others dried and etched with thousands of fine wedge marks. This is where the real action happens, although you wouldn't guess it from the way the chief scribe sighs while chewing pomegranate seeds with a kind of poetic indifference. Sumerian librarians weren't just keepers of tablets, they were also the record makers, the editors, and sometimes the bureaucratic poets of their time. Imagine being responsible not only for cataloging centuries' worth of temple annals but also making sure your wedge-pressing apprentices weren't slipping in dirty jokes or skipping ideograms to finish early. It's the oldest editorial nightmare you've never thought of. Today, you're here to observe how each scribe receives their daily assignment. The chief scribe consults a master tablet, a sort of scheduling grid, which outlines which apprentice will be copying which tax account, grain receipt, or legal ruling. The organization isn't alphabetical, they haven't invented that concept yet, but according to tablet type, urgency, and often, temple hierarchy. You're handed a clay list detailing the current copying backlog. It's 10 names long and includes such thrilling works as Sheep Transfer Log from the Temple of Nanshi, Year of the Goat. You try not to let your enthusiasm show too much. While some scribes focus on temple affairs, others are assigned to replicate wisdom texts, standardized proverbs, royal edicts, and even some proto-mythical tales about gods behaving just slightly better than humans. These texts serve as moral instruction, ritual training, and bedtime reading for elite kids who didn't yet know how to rebel properly. Training to become a scribe was no quick affair. Most students started young, memorizing not just signs but full formulaic phrases. One doesn't simply write, "King Enlil favored the city," one must invoke the full template. In the year the moon was kind and barley stood tall, the king of Enlil's breath gave favor to the city. Yes, verbosity was valued. One might argue that Sumerian grammar school was a very long nap with brief interruptions for mud wrestling your stylus back from your classmate. Historians still argue whether all scribes were temple-bound or whether some moonlighted for merchant families and private estates. What's clear is that whoever commissioned their services, scribes wielded soft power. They held the knowledge, after all, and in Sumer, knowledge wasn't just about learning. It was about access. You wander through the tablet copying area and notice a rare scene, two scribes debating a disputed cuneiform sign. Is it a grain measurement? A personal name? Or just sloppy work? They pore over older tablets like scholars at an eternal spelling bee. You leave them mid-disagreement, convinced they'll still be arguing by moonrise. Outside the chamber, you spot a small reed-bound rack where broken tablets go for recycling. Yes, even in the 3rd millennium BCE, there was a system for turning your failed essays into fresh clay. Environmentally friendly, and emotionally satisfying, especially if the tablet in question belonged to a rival. The day winds down, and the scribes file out one by one, each carefully wrapping their wet tablets in damp cloth or placing them under thatched overhangs to dry. One apprentice yawns and smudges a wedge by accident, prompting a mild scolding and a command to rewrite it from scratch. Harsh? Maybe. But these were the original perfectionists. As the lanterns flicker, you begin to wonder how many texts were lost simply because someone got lazy, or clumsy, or distracted by a passing camel. The fragility of history isn't just about time. Sometimes it's about thumbprints and the weather. You find yourself wandering toward the temple complex where the public library's most prized tablets are kept, the ones that aren't just administrative but sacred, historical, or even poetic. The Temple of Nippur, dedicated to Enlil, the chief god, is not only a religious hub but also a cultural and intellectual center. Here, the boundary between librarian, priest, and scholar is delightfully blurry. Inside, the ambient scent of baked clay mingles with faint incense smoke, a strangely soothing combination that settles your thoughts. You notice a series of larger tablets laid out on wooden stands, some inscribed with what appears to be hymns or prayers. These tablets aren't meant for casual copying, they're recited aloud during rituals, meant to preserve divine favor. You overhear a young priest practicing a chant, the rhythmic tapping of the wedge mark seeming to echo in his voice. The ancient language rolls softly, a lullaby from another era. It strikes you how the library serves both earthly administration and celestial communication, two very different but equally important purposes. One of the librarians, noticing your interest, explains that certain tablets are only accessible to a select few, deemed keepers of secrets. These often contain astrology predictions, medicinal recipes involving mysterious plants, or incantations to ward off illness. You wonder if these ancient, secret sections had a little something like a "do not disturb" sign, perhaps in the form of a carved demon to frighten away casual readers. Historians still argue whether these mystical texts were genuinely practical or more symbolic gestures of power by the priests. The line between science and superstition was, after all, thinner than a reed stylus's tip. You notice a tablet detailing a rather odd recipe, mixing beer with specific herbs to create a soothing balm for skin irritations. It sounds like the original spa treatment, although perhaps less fragrant than today's lavender lotions. You imagine a stressed-out scribe rubbing this concoction on tired hands after a long day of wedge marking. As the afternoon shadows lengthen, you pause to admire a carved relief showing a figure handing a tablet to a seated king, likely symbolizing the transfer of knowledge or perhaps a symbolic contract between gods, scribes, and rulers. It's a reminder that these libraries weren't just dusty archives but active players in governance. You hear the faintest chuckle behind you. A junior scribe is recounting a favorite joke about a donkey who tried to learn cuneiform and ended up just braying, hee-haw, in wedge shapes. You smile, realizing that humor hasn't changed much. People have always loved a good pun, even if it's about illiterate donkeys. Dusk settles as you meander toward the storerooms filled with surplus tablets. Unlike the carefully curated shelves of the sacred texts, these rooms have a different atmosphere, more cluttered, utilitarian, and frankly, a bit dusty. Here, the records of everyday life are stored: barley shipments, livestock inventories, and tax receipts. You pick up a tablet that catalogs sheep, goats, and cattle in one of the outer villages. The level of detail is astonishing: names of herders, grazing rights, even occasional disputes over water usage. It feels like the ancient equivalent of a municipal clerk's desk, a mountain of paperwork that probably drove some poor scribe to the brink of madness. You notice several tablets with the unmistakable signs of corrections, tiny wedges scratched out, entire lines overwritten. You wonder if there was ever a rewrite day or if this was just the natural chaos of life before spellcheck. The scribes who handled these mundane but vital records formed the backbone of the Sumerian economy. Without their work, kings couldn't tax properly, merchants couldn't trade confidently, and farmers wouldn't know if they owed grain or were owed favors. It's an unglamorous role, but absolutely necessary. You find a tablet that appears to be a ledger for a local brewery. The record keeper dutifully notes the number of jugs produced, the barley consumed, and a curious note about a particularly good batch that smelled like the goddess Inanna's hair. You imagine the brewer's pride and the occasional exaggerated compliment to please the temple overseers. Historians still debate how standardized these records truly were, whether every city followed a single system or if local scribes made up rules as they went along. Either way, you sense an early attempt at bureaucracy, which must have required patience, precision, and the occasional sip of strong date wine to get through. You catch the soft scratching of stylus on clay as a young apprentice practices the mundane task of listing ration distributions. You think back to that spa recipe from the temple section and wonder if these scribes ever daydreamed about a better job, or at least a less dusty room. The smell of baked clay mingled with evening air and faint livestock odors reminds you how closely these tablets were tied to real life, living, breathing communities relying on ancient paperwork to keep the world turning. You step outside into the cool evening air, the temple spires silhouetted against a deepening sky. Your mind drifts to the apprenticeships that shaped every scribe's career. These were no brief internships but long, intense training programs beginning in childhood, often within temple schools called adubas, literally, tablet houses. Here, young students sat cross-legged on reed mats, copying repetitive phrases over and over on soft clay. In the year of the flood, the temple of Enlil, the sheep are counted, each phrase drilled into memory to develop precision and speed. It's an oddly soothing mental exercise, akin to a modern mantra or repetitive meditation, designed to ease you into calm focus. You imagine yourself as a 6-year-old apprentice, elbow-deep in clay tablets, struggling to shape wedge marks without smudging the drying surface. Mistakes were common, but patience was a virtue taught alongside cuneiform. One minor slip and you'd be starting over, no undo button in ancient Mesopotamia. The aduba was about more than just writing, though. It was a social space where students learned arithmetic, history, and religious doctrine. They practiced reading aloud, memorizing godly names and temple rituals. The stakes felt high. Scribes weren't just clerks, they were the intellectual elite, the keepers of civilization's story. A quirky detail emerges from some tablets. Students often wrote letters complaining about the severity of their teachers or the monotony of copying sheep logs. It's like finding a 1,000-year-old tweet griping about homework, reminding you that some things never change. Historians still argue how inclusive these schools were. Were daughters of elites also trained as scribes? Evidence suggests mostly boys, but a few remarkable women appear in records, hinting at a more nuanced picture of gender roles in Sumerian literacy. As twilight deepens, you reflect on the dedication required, not just skill, but endurance, discipline, and perhaps a fondness for pomegranates as the chief scribe's snack suggested earlier. The Aduba was a world where knowledge was power, and each wedge pressed into clay was a step toward joining that elite. Your fingers itched to hold a stylus again, to trace the ancient symbols with care, to become part of that chain linking past and present. All through the quiet ritual of writing, you begin your day with a slow stroll through the bustling marketplace of Ur, the city where many tablets were both produced and traded. The air hums with the mingled scents of baked bread, fresh dates, and the faint tang of fermenting beer. Merchants haggle softly over barley prices, and the chatter blends with the distant call of temple priests announcing the day's rituals. It's easy to forget that behind this vibrant marketplace lies a vast network of records, some kept here, some sent to the public library to be archived. Among the many objects exchanged are tablets, sometimes blank for customers who want a personal record, sometimes pre-inscribed with contracts or standard forms. You watch as a merchant pays a scribe to draft a bill of sale on fresh clay, the stylus scratching lightly like a musician tuning their instrument. You imagine these transactions as little conversations frozen in time, each tablet a silent witness to countless agreements, disputes, and promises. Scribes in the marketplace played an essential role, not just writers but negotiators and witnesses who lent their authority to business dealings. The presence of a tablet and a trained scribe made transactions official and harder to dispute later. You can almost hear the soft murmur of a contract being read aloud under the warm sun. Interestingly, some tablets found here contain personal letters, short notes between family members, merchants' updates, or even playful exchanges. One tablet you glimpse is a short love poem, its wedge-shaped symbols arranged like a gentle caress, showing that even in the business-heavy atmosphere, human emotions found a way to slip into clay. Historians still debate how widespread literacy was among the general populace. While scribes were the experts, these small personal tablets suggest a more intimate and everyday use of writing than often assumed, hinting that some merchants and elites might have learned to write just enough to manage their own affairs. You pause at a vendor's stall displaying copies of old tablets for sale, like early paperbacks. You wonder if UR's residents ever collected favorite texts like we collect books, or if tablets were always too valuable and fragile for casual reading. As you meander back toward the library, the mingled sounds and smells of the market seem to echo the constant flow of information, the heartbeat of a society that revered record-keeping as much as it did grain. You enter a quieter wing of the library, dedicated to the archives of royal correspondence. Here, tablets are meticulously stored according to sender, recipient, and subject, essentially an ancient postal system preserved in clay. Imagine the palace officials poring over these missives, each one carrying news from distant cities or neighboring kingdoms. The letters are often formal, filled with ritual greetings and respectful honorifics, but sometimes they reveal surprisingly candid details, complaints about missed tribute, requests for assistance, or even invitations to royal feasts. The tone can shift from solemn diplomacy to light banter, reminding you that even kings and governors had personalities, and perhaps enjoyed a bit of gossip. You spot a tablet that records a particularly amusing exchange between two city rulers over a stolen donkey, complete with sarcastic undertones and veiled threats. You chuckle quietly, knowing that political drama transcends millennia. These archives also include reports from envoys, detailed accounts of festivals, and descriptions of military campaigns. It's a treasure trove of information, painstakingly preserved to remind future generations of alliances and enmities. Historians still argue how much of this correspondence was private and how much was intended for public display. Some tablets might have been deliberately leaked to bolster a ruler's prestige or justify their actions, blending propaganda with record-keeping. You notice that some letters feature the hand of the scribe who drafted them, marked by distinct stylistic flourishes. It's an early example of personal branding, each scribe subtly leaving their mark in an age before signatures became common. The quiet here is profound, broken only by the occasional soft tapping of a stylus copying a text for preservation. You appreciate how these archives provided a living memory for Sumerian political life, ensuring that even disputes over donkey thefts could be remembered, studied, or laughed at centuries later. Your footsteps lead you to a chamber filled with tablets chronicling Sumerian medical practices, a reminder that libraries weren't just about laws and commerce but also health and healing. The faint aroma of crushed herbs and drying plants lingers, as if the knowledge of ancient remedies still clings to the air. The medical tablets are fascinating mixtures of observation and ritual. Recipes for poultices, lists of symptoms, and incantations to ward off evil spirits blend side by side. You learn that ancient physicians believed illnesses could be caused by supernatural forces as well as natural causes, a dual diagnosis that must have kept their days both busy and unpredictable. One tablet outlines a remedy for headaches involving a mixture of ground poppy seeds and honey, which you realize could have genuinely soothing effects. Another suggests a peculiar treatment using crocodile-dung as a sunscreen, though you suspect that's more about belief than practicality. Medical scribes recorded not only treatments but also surgical procedures, like removing arrowheads or setting broken bones. You imagine the temple courtyards filled with patients seeking help, priests chanting softly as healers worked. The lines between doctor, magician, and priest were fluid, and you can almost feel the hum of chanting blending with the scrape of styluses on clay. Historians still argue whether these tablets were practical manuals for everyday doctors or more symbolic collections to impress patients with learned mystique. Either way, they represent one of the earliest medical libraries in human history. You spot a small tablet with a humorous note at the bottom, apparently written by a weary healer. Patient insists the fish oil smells worse than the disease. A timeless complaint, you think, perhaps the oldest recorded grumble about medicine. As you leave, you catch a glimpse of a scribe practicing medical terminology, repeating arcane terms while absent-mindedly tapping a rhythmic pattern. It's clear these texts served as both reference and training tools for generations of healers. Moving into a warmer, sunlit room, you find yourself among tablets related to food production and storage, an essential part of Sumerian daily life and the economy. Large jars filled with dried dates, wheat stalks, and barley grains hint at the importance of these staples, while tablets list precise measurements and delivery dates. You handle a tablet detailing the distribution of bread rations during a festival, a reminder that food wasn't just sustenance but also a social and religious symbol. The tablet records the names of recipients, quantities allotted, and notes about special offerings for priests and officials. You learn that the Sumerians used standardized measurements for grains, which were carefully regulated to prevent disputes. The term gur describes a specific volume, roughly equivalent to 300 liters, and appears repeatedly on these tablets, reflecting an early effort at consistency. An amusing side note appears on a damaged tablet describing a bread shortage due to excessive festival dancing, perhaps an early example of celebrating a little too hard. You can picture weary bakers rubbing their tired hands and wishing for quieter festivities. Historians still debate whether these records were primarily economic or also symbolic acts of communal sharing, reflecting the close ties between agriculture, religion, and governance. Nearby, tablets detail brewing techniques, with recipes that might explain why Sumerian beer was a staple, not just for celebration but for daily hydration. You imagine the rich, frothy liquid as a comforting presence amid the dusty heat. You pause to consider the connection between these food records and earlier sections on bureaucracy and scribal training, how knowledge, whether about sheep or barley, was carefully inscribed and preserved to sustain civilization. The library's quieter corridors lead you to an intriguing collection of legal tablets, ancient contracts, rulings, and dispute settlements that reveal much about Sumerian society. These texts are some of the earliest known examples of codified law, predating even Hammurabi's famous code. You examine a tablet outlining the rules for property inheritance, which appear surprisingly detailed. It stipulates how land and possessions were divided among family members, showing an early recognition of legal rights and responsibilities. Another tablet deals with the regulations governing marriage dowries, highlighting the economic and social importance of these agreements. The tone is formal but sometimes softened by the inclusion of customary blessings and wishes for harmony. You find a curious case where a contract stipulates that a man must provide his wife with a certain number of goats annually, or face a fine. You smile, imagining a very practical approach to marital obligations. Historians still debate how strictly these laws were enforced, and whether they reflected social ideals more than everyday realities. Were courts rigorous, or was justice more flexible depending on status and circumstance? You notice tablets that functioned as dispute mediations, including a colorful case about a stolen donkey that echoes the royal correspondence you saw earlier. Such cases provide a glimpse into the day-to-day conflicts and resolutions that shaped community life. The precision and care with which these laws were inscribed suggest a deep respect for order and fairness. You consider how much of modern legal practice owes its roots to these first written attempts at justice. Turning a corner, you enter a bright room filled with school exercises, practice tablets filled with repetitive signs, scribbles, and sometimes doodles. These tablets offer a fascinating peek into the education of Sumerian youth. Many of these tablets are covered in neat rows of the same character or phrase repeated dozens of times, ancient equivalents of "practice makes perfect." Some show attempts at writing complex ideograms, others simpler phonetic signs. What's delightful is the presence of playful marks, little sketches of animals, stick figures, and even a crude caricature of a grumpy teacher, which you suspect was drawn by a particularly cheeky apprentice. You imagine these tablets as a kind of ancient workbook, used under the watchful eye of a teacher who probably sighed at every smudged wedge mark. Education was rigorous but included moments of levity, as any good school should. Historians still debate how widespread formal schooling was. While temple scribal schools were elite institutions, some evidence suggests that more informal or family-based education might have existed, though perhaps less standardized. You pick up a tablet where a student has written a short proverb about patience, revealing the moral lessons intertwined with writing practice. These lessons were as important as the script itself, shaping character as well as skill. The tactile feel of these tablets, rough but malleable, reminds you of the physicality of learning, the slow pressing of wedge into clay, the rhythm of repetition as a meditative act. You step into a quieter corner where a collection of ritual and religious tablets awaits. These texts are full of prayers, hymns, and instructions for ceremonies that governed much of Sumerian daily life. The soft glow of sunlight filtering through latticed windows casts shifting patterns on the clay surfaces, almost like a dance of divine light. One tablet describes the elaborate steps of a harvest festival, where priests, farmers, and citizens gathered to thank the gods for their bounty. You can almost hear the chanting, the rhythmic beat of drums, and the gentle clinking of offerings laid upon altars. The rituals were both solemn and joyous, a reminder of how spirituality permeated every aspect of existence. A curious entry details a ritual meant to ensure good dreams by placing certain herbs under one's pillow, an ancient form of sleep therapy that you find strangely comforting. You imagine a weary farmer resting after a long day, hopeful that the gods will grant peaceful slumber. Historians still argue about how literal these rituals were versus symbolic or performative acts. Were they viewed as magical necessities or social traditions reinforcing community bonds? Probably a bit of both, you think. Interestingly, some tablets include amusing notes about mishaps during ceremonies, like the time a goat escaped mid-sacrifice and ran through the temple, causing uproar and laughter. It humanizes these ancient priests and worshippers in a delightful way. As you move on, the lingering scent of incense and the quiet reverence of these texts invite you to reflect on the intertwining of faith, daily life, and the written word in ancient Sumer. Now you find yourself in the section dedicated to ancient mathematics, tablets filled with numbers, calculations, and geometric diagrams. The Sumerians developed one of the first numerical systems, and these tablets reveal their practical uses as well as their intellectual curiosity. One tablet shows a complex calculation for dividing a field into equal plots, probably for tax or ownership purposes. The wedge marks form neat rows of numbers, while the scribe's precision hints at a deep respect for accuracy. You discover a tablet demonstrating the base 60 counting system, a legacy that still influences our measurement of time and angles today. It's strange to think that the way you tell time at night traces back to these ancient clay records. Some tablets include multiplication tables, and you imagine students laboring over these exercises much like you once did in school. The mix of practical and theoretical math here feels surprisingly modern, with scribes balancing both necessity and fascination. Historians still debate the extent to which these mathematical tools were used outside elite scribal circles. Were farmers and merchants mathematically literate, or was this knowledge mostly confined to temple administrators? You smile at a tablet with a curious annotation, seemingly a joke about a student's poor math skills, proving that even ancient classrooms had their "I don't get it" moments. As you trace the neat cuneiform numbers, you appreciate how Sumerian innovations quietly shaped the foundations of mathematics for millennia to come. In a cooler, dimmer chamber, you encounter tablets dedicated to astronomy and calendar keeping, a vital part of Sumerian life for farming, religious festivals, and daily rhythms. These texts map the movements of stars and planets with surprising accuracy for their time. One tablet charts the phases of the moon, which regulated the timing of agricultural activities and temple ceremonies. You picture farmers watching the night sky, interpreting the celestial dance as a guide for planting or harvesting. The Sumerians divided the year into lunar months, but adjusting this system required complex calculations and occasional leap months to keep the calendar aligned with the solar year. You imagine temple astronomers laboring to keep these records straight, probably under candlelight and with a fair amount of head-scratching. Historians still argue how much of the astronomical observations were purely scientific versus deeply spiritual, given the association of celestial bodies with gods and fate. One tablet features a curious record of a comet sighting, described with awe and perhaps a hint of apprehension. You wonder how such celestial events influenced public mood or political decisions. You pause to appreciate the blend of empirical observation and mythic storytelling, a hallmark of Sumerian attempts to understand their world both practically and poetically. Your next stop is a fascinating collection of economic records, tablets documenting trade, taxation, and labor. These mundane texts, filled with lists of goods and numbers, form the backbone of Sumerian civilization's complex economy. You read a tablet itemizing shipments of wool, copper, and precious stones sent from one city-state to another. The careful accounting reveals the intricate networks that connected distant regions through commerce. Taxes, too, are carefully recorded, grain contributions from farmers, labor obligations, and even tax in beer entries, which remind you of how beer was both currency and comfort. One tablet amusingly notes a delayed shipment, due to the scribe's cat sleeping on the tablet, a rare glimpse of humor breaking through bureaucratic routine. Historians still debate how centralized the Sumerian economy really was, and whether these records represent an early form of state control or simply bookkeeping by merchants. You also encounter wage records, showing payments to workers building temples or digging canals. It's a reminder that behind these dry numbers lie the daily lives of countless individuals contributing to the city's prosperity. As you leave, you reflect on how these economic tablets, though often overlooked, are essential to understanding the rhythms and realities of ancient life. You come across tablets dedicated to education and scribal training, a quieter corner where the future of knowledge was forged. Here, apprentice scribes practiced their writing on clay tablets, copying proverbs, myths, and administrative texts over and over. One tablet is a neat copy of a famous proverb advising patience and humility: "The fool is patient until he gets the blame." You imagine a young student sighing as they laboriously carve each wedge-shaped mark, fingers dusty and mind wandering to dinner. Sumerian scribal schools were rigorous places, teaching language, arithmetic, and even music. It's said that some students would practice by writing on small, portable tablets, perfect for sneaking notes or doodles, though those wouldn't survive time as these do. Historians still debate how accessible this education was. Was it limited to elite boys, or did some girls and commoners slip in through cracks? Evidence is scarce, but a few tablets suggest that at least some non-elites gained literacy. You spot a tablet with playful practice lines that seem to parody official decrees, hinting scribes had a sense of humor even in training. Perhaps boredom sparked creativity after all. As you glance around, you feel a quiet respect for these students, the unsung architects who preserved and transmitted Sumerian culture. In a shadowy alcove, you find texts about medical knowledge, healing spells, diagnoses, and prescriptions that reveal the blend of science and superstition in Sumerian healthcare. One tablet describes treating a headache by applying a poultice of herbs and chanting a prayer to the goddess of healing. You imagine a patient lying quietly, soothed by the mix of ritual and remedy. The Sumerians used a variety of natural substances, from garlic to crocodile-dung, the latter surprisingly recommended as sunscreen. You recall that odd detail from an earlier section and chuckle softly at their resourcefulness. Historians still argue about how effective these treatments were or if they primarily served a psychological purpose. Either way, they highlight a complex understanding of the body and illness. Interestingly, some tablets record surgical procedures, like draining abscesses, which suggests practical knowledge alongside magical beliefs. You also find evidence of specialized healers, early doctors who combined herbalism with divination, highlighting how intertwined medicine and religion were. As you settle in, you think about how modern medicine owes a quiet debt to these ancient practitioners balancing faith and empiricism. You now enter a cozy nook filled with personal letters, intimate glimpses into Sumerian social life. These aren't grand royal decrees but everyday communications between family members, friends, and merchants. One letter from a husband to his wife asks about the baby's health and mentions missing her cooking. You almost smell the simmering stew and hear the gentle lullabies sung across the courtyard. Another letter discusses a dispute over a sheep sale, written with a polite but firm tone that suggests the importance of maintaining good business relations even in conflict. Historians still debate whether these letters were sent directly or passed through scribes and messengers, but their personal tone remains undeniable. You find a note apologizing for missing a festival, expressing regret and hope to make it up with a gift. The warmth and familiarity in these words feel timeless. These letters remind you that beneath the monumental achievements and complex bureaucracies, the Sumerians were people with feelings, frustrations, and affection, much like us. A cool breeze seems to accompany your arrival in the section dedicated to legal texts, contracts, wills, and laws that govern Sumerian life. These tablets are surprisingly detailed, laying out everything from property rights to marriage agreements. One contract records the sale of a slave, described with clinical language that contrasts starkly with the human life it represents. You pause, acknowledging the complexities of ancient society. Marriage contracts specify dowries, rights, and responsibilities, revealing a world where family alliances were carefully negotiated. You imagine families gathering around clay tablets, sealing deals that shaped generations. Historians still debate the degree of women's agency in these arrangements, with some evidence suggesting women could inherit property and initiate divorce. A particularly fascinating tablet details the lost property laws, with amusing penalties for those who misplaced goods, like having to buy the owner a goat as compensation. You reflect on how these legal texts laid the groundwork for centuries of lawmaking, and you wonder how often disputes ended peacefully with a tablet rather than a brawl. You find yourself surrounded by culinary tablets, recipes, ingredient lists, and notes on food preparation that evoke the smells and tastes of Sumerian kitchens. One recipe calls for barley, dates, and honey to make a sweet porridge, probably enjoyed by both commoners and elites. You almost taste the comforting warmth, the sticky sweetness clinging to your spoon. Another tablet describes how to brew beer, a staple beverage revered both socially and spiritually. You picture villagers gathering around large vats, chatting softly as the fermentation bubbles. Historians still argue whether beer was mostly an everyday drink or reserved for special occasions. Judging by the number of beer recipes, you lean toward the former. There's even a tablet listing exotic spices, hinting at trade routes that brought distant flavors to Sumer's tables, like cumin and coriander. You pause to imagine the clatter of pots, the laughter, and the shared meals that these tablets quietly preserve, reminding you how food was central to community and celebration. A stack of tablets focuses on architecture and city planning, the blueprints of a world built brick by brick, canal by canal. These records illustrate how Sumerians designed their sprawling cities with temples, markets, and residential quarters. One tablet details the dimensions of a grand ziggurat, its terraces rising step by step toward the sky, a physical connection between earth and divine. You picture laborers mixing mud bricks under the hot sun, architects sketching plans on wet clay, and citizens navigating bustling streets. Historians still debate whether urban planning was centrally controlled or grew more organically. These tablets suggest a mix of both, a vision guided by priests and kings, executed by craftsmen and workers. An amusing note describes a minor argument between builders over the placement of a doorway, showing that even in ancient construction, egos and preferences mattered. You reflect on how these early urban planners shaped not just cities, but social and religious life through their designs. In a softly lit alcove, you encounter tablets that record musical compositions and instructions, a rare and enchanting glimpse into Sumerian soundscapes. One tablet contains a hymn accompanied by cuneiform notation for a lyre, the strings' vibrations almost audible in your mind's ear. You imagine temple musicians playing during ceremonies, the notes weaving through incense smoke and echoing off stone walls. Some texts describe tuning techniques, while others list different instruments like drums, flutes, and rattles. Historians still argue about how closely modern scholars can interpret these ancient notations, given their symbolic and incomplete nature. A charming detail mentions musicians competing in festivals, their lively performances celebrated alongside poetry and dance. You feel a gentle warmth imagining these sounds soothing the soul, much as your voice aims to soothe you now. You now wander into a trove of texts related to agriculture, seasonal planting guides, irrigation techniques, and crop management instructions essential to sustaining Sumer's population. One tablet explains the precise timing for sowing barley, based on lunar phases and local weather patterns, blending observation with tradition. Irrigation canal maintenance logs show the importance of communal labor in ensuring water flowed to thirsty fields. Historians still debate how much farmers relied on written guides versus oral knowledge passed through generations. A curious note mentions a farmer rewarded with extra grain for inventing a new plowing method, hinting at early agricultural innovation. You visualize early farmers working the fertile land, feeling the sun's warmth and the cool touch of water, a timeless connection to the earth. You pause beside tablets chronicling important biographies and royal deeds, stories of kings, generals, and legendary figures that shaped Sumerian identity. One tablet recounts the reign of Gilgamesh, blending history with myth as you hear echoes of his heroic exploits and quests. These biographies serve to legitimize rulers' authority and inspire citizens, mixing fact with larger-than-life storytelling. Historians still argue about how much of these accounts are true history versus crafted legend designed to impress and intimidate. An amusing aside mentions Gilgamesh's companion Enkidu's fondness for wild animals and rough humor, humanizing these epic figures. You feel drawn into a world where history and myth dance together, telling stories that both record and create identity. Finally, for now, you discover a set of tablets describing leisure activities, games, festivals, and pastimes that brought joy and rest to Sumerian lives. One tablet details rules for a board game similar to modern backgammon, complete with instructions on moves and scoring. Festivals involved music, dance, and communal feasting, a welcome break from daily toil and temple duties. Historians still debate the origins of some games and how widely they spread, but these texts show leisure's deep roots in human culture. A tablet amusingly notes a cheating scandal in a game competition, reminding you that competitive spirit is truly timeless. You smile, recognizing that beneath the vast complexity of Sumerian civilization, people sought simple pleasures. Much like we do today, you find tablets detailing the use of seals, small carved stones rolled onto clay to mark ownership or authorize documents. Each seal is unique, like a personal signature, and often intricately decorated with animals or mythic scenes. Holding one in your mind's eye, you imagine an official gently rolling it over a fresh tablet, the soft impression leaving a permanent mark of identity and authority. Some seals depicted gods or heroic tales, blending personal branding with spiritual protection. You recall hearing that these seals were sometimes worn as amulets, blurring the line between function and fashion. Historians still discuss whether seal designs were standardized or if individuals commissioned custom art, but their role in commerce and administration is undeniable. A quirky detail mentions a merchant whose seal was so complex that no one else could replicate it, even his family struggled to remember it. You admire the craftsmanship and subtle power these tiny objects held, quietly shaping daily life and bureaucracy. Next, you encounter tablets recording scribes' salaries and labor contracts, giving insight into the economic realities of these knowledge workers. One tablet notes the payment of barley and oil to scribes, essential staples that fueled long hours of writing and thinking. You picture scribes pausing their work to enjoy a humble meal, fingers still dusty but minds alert to the next line of text. Interestingly, some records hint at scribes negotiating better terms or receiving bonuses for exceptional work, a reminder that even ancient office politics existed. Historians still debate how widespread literacy was outside the scribe class, but these tablets confirm scribes' important social status. A humorous entry describes a scribe who complained about the cold drafts in the library, prompting his supervisor to assign a warmer spot near the fire. You appreciate this glimpse of everyday life behind the solemn facade of ancient scholarship. You now move to texts concerning religious rituals performed in the libraries themselves, prayers for wisdom, protection of texts, and offerings to knowledge deities. One hymn praises Nisaba, goddess of writing and learning, asking her to inspire scribes and guard sacred tablets from harm. You imagine incense smoke curling around rows of tablets as priests chant softly, creating a serene atmosphere charged with reverence. These rituals underline the sacred nature of knowledge in Sumerian culture, blending spiritual and practical care. Historians still argue how much of these rituals were daily routines versus special ceremonies, but their presence reveals the deep respect for written word. An amusing note mentions a ritual involving the symbolic washing of clay tablets to cleanse them from errors, an ancient version of proofreading anxiety. You feel the calm of this space, where faith and scholarship meet to nurture the human quest for understanding. A small cluster of tablets focuses on trade records linked to libraries, how manuscripts and raw materials like clay were exchanged between cities. One document details a shipment of tablets to a distant city, indicating a network of knowledge exchange across the region. You picture traders packing fragile tablets carefully, balancing commerce and culture with every journey. Historians still debate the extent of intercity intellectual exchange versus isolated local traditions, but evidence points to surprising connectivity. A quirky detail describes a courier who memorized entire tablets to speed delivery, a human hard drive, in an era before digital backups. You reflect on how libraries were not just static archives but active hubs in a broader knowledge ecosystem. You come across texts describing library maintenance, cleaning schedules, repairs of damaged tablets, and organization strategies. One tablet lists workers responsible for dusting shelves and tidying storage rooms, surprisingly detailed given the material's fragility. You imagine these caretakers moving quietly among the stacks, gentle hands brushing away dust without disturbing the delicate clay. Historians still debate how systematic this maintenance was and how often tablets needed recopying due to wear. A charming detail describes a caretaker who named his favorite tablet and spoke to it affectionately, a surprisingly tender bond with inanimate objects. You consider how care and respect extended beyond authorship to preservation, ensuring knowledge survived generations. You find instructional tablets for scribes on the art of clay preparation and tablet baking, essential skills for producing durable records. One detailed text explains the precise mix of clay, water, and straw, and the firing process that hardened tablets for permanence. You picture artisans mixing ingredients in a sunlit courtyard, the smell of baked earth mingling with morning air. Historians still debate variations in technique across cities, with some tablets showing signs of multiple firings for correction. A curious note mentions a scribe who accidentally overcooked a batch, resulting in tablets so brittle they shattered under the lightest touch. You smile at the mix of craft and chance involved in making these timeless artifacts. You enter a space filled with literary works, poems, epics, and fables that entertained and instructed Sumerians. One tablet holds the tale of a clever fox outwitting a lazy wolf, a story echoing through millennia with its sly humor. These texts reveal a culture that valued storytelling as much as record-keeping. Historians still argue about how widely these stories circulated, Were they confined to elite audiences or shared orally among common folk? An entertaining detail shows scribes sometimes adding humorous margin notes, like, "Don't try this at home," breaking the fourth wall centuries early. You feel the warmth of laughter crossing time, a gentle reminder of our shared humanity. You find records describing festivals honoring the written word, occasions where scribes and scholars gathered to celebrate learning. One tablet details a festival with poetry recitations, music, and offerings to Nisaba. You imagine the joy and solemnity intertwined in these gatherings, a lively yet respectful homage to knowledge. Historians still debate how often these festivals occurred or how widespread participation was beyond the literate class. An amusing note describes a festival game where participants competed to write the longest sentence without a mistake, ancient spelling bees, basically. You feel the sense of community forged through shared reverence and playful challenge. A quiet corner reveals texts on ethical advice and moral teachings, part of the library's role in guiding behavior. One tablet offers maxims about honesty, respect, and moderation, blending practical wisdom with spiritual values. You picture a teacher reading these aloud to attentive students, their voices steady and calm in the evening air. Historians still argue whether these were official state ethics or personal reflections collected over time. A humorous tidbit notes advice against gossip, with a warning that, "The tongue that speaks ill shall taste dust," a poetic way to encourage discretion. You feel these words gently reminding you, even as you prepare to rest, that wisdom is timeless. You come across tablets describing the fate of lost or damaged texts, efforts to recover or replace important works. One tablet records the painstaking copying of a damaged epic, line by line, preserving its story for future readers. You imagine scribes carefully comparing fragments, their eyes straining over faded marks as they reconstruct lost words. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was or if many texts simply vanished forever. A poignant note records a scribe's lament over a lost tablet, revealing a rare personal emotion attached to this work. You reflect on the fragility of knowledge and the dedication required to keep it alive across centuries. Finally, you linger in the peaceful quiet of the library's closing hours, the sun setting on a place where thousands of voices whisper through clay and ink. You feel the calm of countless hands and minds working together, creating a legacy that still breathes beneath your fingertips. In this fading light, imagine yourself gently setting down a tablet, knowing it will endure, a silent guardian of ancient thought. As you drift toward rest, the soft crackle of clay and quiet murmur of stories ease your mind, carrying you toward dreams wrapped in history's gentle embrace. Remember the crocodile-dung sunscreen, the cheeky scribal notes, and the clever fox stories. They're all part of the tapestry you've wandered through tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let yourself float, cradled by time and tales.